I saw yesterday was nothing short of impressive. I said coming into the Paris home series that it would be one heck of a story if the Florida Mutineers could pull this off. It would be one impressive story if the team that was looked upon as the outcasts coming into the season could in fact become the first team to reach 3 championships and to also be the first team to win back-to-back championships in the CDL. It would be one crazy story if the Florida Mutineers could bring in 2 players that weren't already in the CDL before. One player that has never been a professional in his life and use those 2 to win titles, right? That was the biggest talking point coming into this event for me when it comes down to the Mutineers was, could they be consistent, right? It wasn't a matter of could they be good, because we had seen previously with the core majority of this roster the talent that it possessed, right? We've seen on numerous occasions that they can get to grand finals. That, like I said, a majority of this team has been to multiple over the year. The question was never about the talent. The question was, can that talent be consistent? And there were many moments throughout different interviews with the Mutineer players where they discussed how, you know what, the only reason why we haven't been consistent was because of the amount of team changes that were made. Which, you know, granted, there is a little bit to be said there, and I believe that is partly true, but I do recall the same Florida team that won Dallas was also the same Florida team that the very next event had the worst performance in CDL history to date at an 0-6 map count. So that's why I did in some ways worry about this event for Florida. Not because I was worried if they could have the talent, but that they could do it again and so rapidly. I was worried that they wouldn't be able to replicate at the same level, have that same magic the very next event. But they did, right? And that's what's scary, is that not only did they look just as good, one could argue they looked even better than they did just a week ago, right? In terms of map counts, they go from 12-6 to 12-3. Well, and you have to consider the fact that they didn't play against the big 3 this event like they did last event. No, but they did beat 2 of those 3, right? And in fact, the best 2 of those 3. And not only did they beat them more convincingly this event than they did last event, right? In Minnesota, the Mutineers go Game 5, Round 11 with the Dallas Empire. Here in Paris, they win 3-1. In Minnesota, the Mutineers 3-1 versus the Atlanta FaZe. Here in Paris, they win 3-0, becoming, by the way, the only team to ever 3-0 the Atlanta FaZe in CDL history. Also, winning one of the most dominant maps in the process I've seen in Call of Duty history at 235-70 in the Game 3 Dom. And I had the exact same reaction as my buddy Tactical Rap had on Twitter. It looked like a hardpoint score, for God's sake. I mean, the way that they were just dominating, and no pun intended, domination, was unbelievably impressive, and considering the team that they were facing off against, which, like I said, is without question a victory versus one of the best teams in the CDL. Like I said, this team didn't decline. They only got better and got better versus the top teams. Like I said, to put it in perspective, right, to show how crazy these results have been, in Minnesota, the Mutineers, they had the big 3 in front of them, right? They had Atlanta, they had Chicago, they had Dallas, all 3 of those teams in front of them, which I think by community vote, 95% of people had one of those 3 teams winning the event, myself included. I'm not about to sit here and act as if, oh, I definitely had Florida. No, I absolutely did not have Florida winning that. So to showcase how impressive this is, 3 teams in front of them in Minnesota, the big 3, they beat all 3 of them, right? In Paris, the Mutineers, in terms of power rankings, by a vast majority of the community, myself included in that, have 2 teams in front of them, right? The Dallas Empire and the Atlanta FaZe. And what do the Mutineers do? They beat the 2 teams that are in front of them, and they beat them, like I said, even worse than they did the event before. This is without, folks, this is without a doubt the best team in the game. They deserve that title after what they've been able to do and how they've been able to do it. I can tell you right now what the argument is going to be against them, right? They haven't done it on LAN yet. You can't be considered the best team in the world if you haven't done it on LAN. Listen, folks, that argument only works if there's an alternative, right? If we have got an online league and LAN tournaments going on at the same time, and one team is performing well online but not on LAN, I get that, right? That makes perfect sense to me, right? The difference between one performance versus another. The thing with Florida, though, is that this argument does not apply. And the reason is that online is currently the highest form of competition that we can have, right? We are currently under worldwide circumstances that won't allow for anything else other than what we have right now. So are they the best team in the world? Yes, because this is the best that the world can provide. The world is dealing with the pandemic right now, which makes this the highest form of competition available. So is Florida the best at what is currently the highest form of competition available? You're darn right they are, right? Not only that, but Florida are checking the boxes. Florida are checking the two boxes that you normally have if you are thinking about moving a team up in the standings, right? If you're thinking about moving a team into the #1 spot, you usually go through two questions, right? The first question, are they beating the teams that are above them? Because that's important, right? I mean, if they're not beating the teams that are above them, it makes it difficult to argue that they are better than the teams that are in the #1, 2, 3, 4 spot. You get my point. Yes, right? Florida checks that box. Why? Because they have beaten those teams 5 times now, right? They've beaten the big three, and they've beaten Atlanta and Dallas twice on 2 different occasions. Are they winning consistently? That's the other box, right? Because if a team has a major performance, you want to be careful, right? You want to be careful about moving a team up in the standings based off of one result. And that's happened for a few different rosters over the season. It's hard, right? It's online in some cases, right, to argue that, hey, should this team be moving up? That is why it was so important for Florida, in my opinion, to be a consistent roster, and why I wasn't 100% sure if they could be a consistent roster. The reason why I didn't instantly move them up to #1, which I don't believe was right, by the way, but the reason why I didn't was because it had to be consistent. So are they winning consistently? They are now, right? They're the only team to win back-to-back championships this season, right? The organization, a majority of the players, have won 3 championships this season. So the consistency is there, and they are beating consistently the top tier teams. So what the Mutineers have done recently is nothing short of remarkable. Obviously, it isn't in a LAN environment. I get it, right? And that's the only thing that's currently holding them back. And that's not something that they have the ability to control. That's also something to keep in mind. And a lot of analysts have been very, very smartly pointing that out, right? This is something that if the Florida Mutineers could change, folks, they would, right? It's not as if you can blame Awakening for performing well online. What else does he have to do? He has nothing else that he can possibly do as of this moment. And when the time calls for it, those questions will properly be brought up, and they will either be addressed or not, based on the player's point of view. It is not the Mutineers' fault that they are 11-3 in hardpoint. It's not their fault that they have won 11 of their last 12 hardpoints, or that they're 7-4 in search and destroy, in which case 3 of those losses come from arguably the 3 best S&D teams in the world right now, the Empire, FaZe, and Gorillas. Or the fact that they're 6-2 in domination, with losses only coming from one team, that being the Dallas Empire. It's also not their fault that in 8 series, which equals out to 33 maps, teams have only been able to beat them in back-to-back maps twice. Listen, I am incredibly impressed by what I have seen from the Florida Mutineers, right? What they've been able to accomplish and what they've been able to do is so shocking that people don't know how to handle it, right? The instant reply that I started to get on a lot of tweets that I brought up was not just the online conversation, but it has to be the fact that the Mutineers are cheating, right? I mean, that's the only liable and the only actual reason why these guys are playing so well. I mean, it is unbelievable that these guys are so talented. They have to be cheating. And you know that when those things are coming out, that goes to show how great a roster is. And I am by no means directing any way a comparison toward this roster and the team that I'm getting ready to bring up, because they are in no way currently comparable outside of this specific example. But there was a team back in the day in Black Ops 2 and Ghost that was called Complexity that also, by how good that they were also claimed that they were cheating. Right? Like I said, I'm not drawing a comparison, and so I don't want to see people in the comments or people on Twitter directing this at me and saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're comparing them to Complexity. I'm not. What I'm saying is that you know a team is good when people are looking at this roster and the first reaction is they have to be cheating because of how darn good that they are. Like I said, this event was so impressive by the Florida Mutineers, and I understand that it's not on LAN yet. But what we have seen with the transition that so many players make from online to LAN, and I don't know an exact percentage, but there is a very high percentage chance that a lot, and I'm not saying everything, but a lot of this has the ability to transfer over. This is a roster that not only deserves, but outrightly gets the #1 title. Right? They are the team that, no questions about it, gets the title of being the #1 team in the game, and there is no real debate around it.